name is Paul Jones. I'm one of the senior application consultants at Configure Grand Rapids office. I think most of you developers in this room actually know me. I think I trained most of you. So, how's it going? Also, before I get started, I want to give I don't think there's any of them in this room, but I want to give a special thanks to OFS Brands. They're kind enough to let me present their parts of their extension in my presentation. So this is on Autopapers. And Autopapers was initially created for OFS Brands, but we took it as an opportunity to make our own abstract out of it, and that was just our first extension to use it. So what is our, also I need to apologize, I don't have a presentation. You might not be surprised to hear this week has been interesting for us, so I did not have time. But I will do my best to explain everything. First, I want to show you Autopapers, or at least one version of it, so we can all be on the same page while I start talking. Okay, that was Autopapers. Questions? Thank you. So, in the case of OFS Brands, we needed a way to generate reports for their installers. They needed bracketry reports, they needed electrical diagrams for their installers, and things like that. So we needed a way to do it very quickly. I was investigating our current options, our option, I should say, which was our current print report system. And after talking to others who have made print reports, decided that was the worst decision ever. From what I hear, our print report system is very powerful, but it's very, very complicated. A lot of people who have used it have decided that it's the worst option. If there's any way to make this process easier at all, in any way, shape, or form, go with it. So I decided, you know what, paper spaces are really easy. Paper spaces are just a normal space with snappers in it, just with paper-like dimensions. How about I just kick out those automatically? One of our other partners was already doing something similar to this, and it worked out really well for them. So I decided to do the same thing and make it abstract. All it's doing is kicking out paper spaces. And when they're out, these are plain old paper spaces, just like any other. So the user can come in here and say they don't like this title block, get rid of it, add in their own, or they need this to be smaller because this needs more area, whatever. It's a normal paper space. They can do whatever they want with it in this output. And the whole system that Autopapers is just the mechanisms for gathering up everything that should generate its own paper and mechanisms to actually make a paper from a group. As of right now, we've expanded on this a little bit since the last time we presented. In the last version of this, it was dependent on what you see here, these kind of selection snappers. They look a lot like tags. In fact, if I switch to tags, you can see they're very, very similar. The system depended on some kind of a selection snapper, just some way for the user to indicate, I want this to be in a group, and I want this to be in a group. Or if your tool wants to go that far, you can actually add some tool to make those groups automatically. Other options? Well, let me present it this way. When you're going to do some kind of Autopaper implementation, you need to decide where your groups are coming from. The selection one was the only option in the past. A new option we've added is the ability to have snappers create their own groups. Like for example, maybe these worktops can have code in them to tell the system themselves, hey, I'm in a group, I should generate my own report. This whole selection snapper is really unnecessary. OFS Brands didn't go this route, but that could very easily be a thing. A good use case might be a panel system. Panel systems usually know they're part of a panel run, so it could be very possible for every panel in a panel run to say, you know what, we are all one thing, we're all going to need our own reports, so we are in a group. So sort of self-reporting snappers. The third option is something we've added very recently. I'm going to bring up code for that. That look pretty good? Yeah, it's pretty good. There's now a new hook in play, this gather AP environment hook. So this gets called anytime it's about time to do Autopapers. This is another function here. Let me go to the approach here. And inspect. every extension is able to install their own group environment gathering hook. So whenever the system says it's time to do auto papers, which can happen at different times, and I'll talk about those in a second. But at any given time, when the system says it's time to run auto papers, an extension's hook can fire off to generate its own groups based on whatever it wants. It's given a copy of the space we're making papers for, and that's it. I added a quick example of that in Fika. Oops. So these panels in the background are from Fika Office. These need to generate their own panel type reports. So right now the user can already add in these guys, right? That's cool in a 2D view, but maybe we need a specialized report that does a more detailed breakdown of these things. I wanted to add something so that the user, A, doesn't need to put in any kind of a special selection snapper, doesn't need to put in one of these, well, P gets filtered out in this viewport, doesn't need to put in one of those. And also the idea of a self-reporting snapper in the case of a panel run, I decided not to go that way because it might get a bit hairy with these all being separate snappers. Which one is going to be the one that says I'm in a group, if they don't all say it. So what I added to Fika was a hook. Let's see here. Init do FL create paper groups. There's a little hook that says whenever the system is about to run auto papers, go through all the panel frames in the drawing, group them up by their panel type, and make their own group. So you can base it on selection snappers or explicit code to find groups themselves. So if I go back to my print reports, you can see some of the reports that I kicked out were actually from Fika. These quick and dirty panel type reports. I apologize for them not being pretty. I did this in like 10 minutes. So, just to give you an idea. So, that is the new bit, the ability to add groups dynamically. Let's see, what else should we talk about? We should talk about what groups are, because that is actually about to change. What was I? Let's go back here. Thank you. This is a group. Basically a lot of fluff, and then this. This is all the system requires in order to generate a paper from a group. You need to tell it what group of snappers you're acting upon, and you need to give it some kind of human readable label. Right now, this label, it doesn't do much, but this is going to play into a bigger effect later with some new features that I'm going to mention in a few. So you can make any kind of group you want as long as it reports a group of snappers. Now there is, we do have a plain old, it's just a group of snappers type box. This is actually what the system uses internally for several things. But if for some reason, if you have a special use case, let's say with the panel report system that I just showed you. If I go to panel type, let's go to here. I decide, for the sake of Fika Office, I'm going to make my own group thing. It reports to the frames. I could have actually had this, instead of storing the frames on it, just have it key off of a certain panel type, and then anytime the system asks for snappers, it goes into drawing and gathers up all those panel types. If we look at the, let's see, go back to here. AP. Oh, of course. It's been too long. There we go. So this is another type of group. It just works off a part tag. So given a part tag, it can figure out what snappers it should gather up. Basic idea being here that if you want to have a group, you need to generate something with this interface. And I don't really care how you do it. It is a bare bones, very abstract, very empty implementation. Do it however you see fit. Then, well, I guess before I move on, are there any questions? It's going to take me a second to track down. Gathering up groups is nice, but that doesn't do you any good if you don't use the groups to make papers. And for that, this. Now this has been around. You also get a hook to append paper makers. Paper makers are what actually, surprise, surprise, make papers. Crazy. This is a paper maker. Again, bare bones, nothing really required of you other than a paper maker needs to, given a group, be able to kick out paper spaces. The way we've seen this used the most is by taking a sort of a template paper space and then for each group applying the template to the snappers. That is using the basic, that's what this one is. And we also provide this as part of auto papers. This is just given a URL to a paper, apply this template to snappers, and that is what's actually doing these guys here. These are all generated from a template. So I drew up a paper space in advance. I placed all of these guys in here, saved it as a special template, and then what happens is, when I go to run auto papers, I load up the paper space and I push the group onto every element in this paper space here, and that element knows how to update itself to that group. So in this case, it knows how to zoom in on the group in question, it knows what view mode to set itself into, it knows how to report like what group that's from, things like that. Or really, it's just updating an existing paper space. The Fika paper makers are actually doing something kind of similar, but they took it a step further. It starts off by making, opening up a template and applying the group to it, but then I do some effects after that. These guys here, these two panels, these are special snappers that are actually inserted by the paper maker. These are, I actually had to make some special text elements and drop them in there in the paper maker. So I'm extending the basic paper maker, I'm loading in from a template, but then after the fact, I'm also dropping in some special text snappers and those panel type snappers. I made this paper maker, like I said, in, I think it was, the template was only like 10 minutes, but the actual paper maker you're seeing here, the code to put up all of this text you see here and put in these snappers and whatnot, I think I did this in like an hour. Making papers and reports this way is extremely fast because it's already working in a situation that you're used to. You're placing snappers into a space. The only thing different here is that you're working in inches instead of meters and feet and stuff. That's basically it. They're just snappers. And so I prefer this. I don't need to learn an advanced print report system, an entirely new subsystem just to generate a report. I'm using a system I'm already familiar with. Let's see here, where was I? What am I doing for time? Okay, playing. So this was the quick and dirty. I unfortunately don't have enough time to really go into detail. So what I can tell you is that we are going to incorporate auto papers into the Fika Office extension. These panels, these panel type reports that you saw, I'm going to refine these, actually make them look professional. These will be part of Fika. So you can actually go to Fika and see examples of how we decided to use print reports. Before we go into like future development, are there any questions on what auto papers is or how it works? Obviously, this can't get into details, but does anyone have any questions? So,
I see this auto papers is an abstract library here, where we can depend on the development. I could not attend the Fika extension session yesterday. So, what is the intended use of Fika extension for?
Fika. Well, let me back up, give you a little backstory. The vast majority of extension development, at least at the American office, was done by configurers in-house. So we had the benefit of shared experience. One of our developers who worked on partner A's extension could still talk to someone who worked on partner B's extension and share kind of like, how do you make a panel, or how do you make a work surface, and that kind of stuff. And so we could say to each other, hey, go look at this extension for an example of this code. And we all grew and became very good working that way. That doesn't work so well for you guys when we can't tell you to go look at one of our partners' codes. That's what FICA is supposed to answer. FICA is supposed to be as close as we can get to a working example of code, like partner-like code. We're going to put a lot of examples there of what we think is our best effort to do a good job in these situations. Sometimes when we come up with new things like auto papers, we'll put them into FICA as well. So that if someone's curious, I can say, hey, go look at FICA. There's an example of an actual use case there. So yeah, it's use case examples, FICA. So,
is there any auto paper stuff in FICA? Like,
at this very moment, no. But there will be, I'm hoping to get working on it as soon as I get back in town. So maybe not with H5, but shortly after, there will be auto papers in FICA.
And so is the intention that the user runs this once when they're done with their drawing, or does auto papers overwrite previously generated auto papers?
So, right out of the box, the auto papers extension will just kick out papers endlessly. In all of the examples, I've actually added a little bit of code to remove previously generated ones. In the code, you can assign these papers to something called a paper group. It's just a way of grouping them, doesn't really mean anything. But what I do in my extensions is I go through, whenever the auto paper system runs, I remove all the papers in this group and then generate again. But that is something I added on top of auto papers. In the future, I'd like that to be baked right in, because obviously users don't want 1,000 papers, especially the same thing. But getting on to like future development, one of the next things we're working at is actually incorporating auto papers right into our print report system, so that it won't kick out all these paper spaces. It's still an option if that's what you want for your implementation, but we suspect the common use case is that users only need these reports when they're doing a report, when they'll go to print out their things. So the auto papers will tie into that and only generate papers inside of the print report, so that they're always going to be up to date because they only happen once. Did I answer your question? I kind of went off on a tangent there for a second.
And again, I'm not deep in the development code, so pardon me for some of my questions. I'm guessing there's ways to, other than the select tags, to figure out what parts of the drawings you want auto papers generated on. Because I can imagine if you've got a large floor, you're going to get thousands of these papers.
Yes,
generated.
Very easily. I forgot to point out. So I said that there are several ways to figure out what kind of groups to have. I showed you these little guys, these selection snappers. I told you that individual snappers can just say for themselves, yes, I'm in a group. And then there's that hook I showed you. Additionally, we can have it work out for part tags. We actually figured this is probably going to be a common use case. We can, for every tag in a drawing, say generate a report for that tag. That works too.
Could you also say if this part of my drawing is frozen or whatever, don't generate auto papers for that? I can imagine reconfigurations of just a certain space on the floor, phased projects, that sort of stuff.
That is a good thought.
I'm
There's
just
not
trying
anything
to
right
figure
now.
out how to get rid of the thousands of papers generated.
Sure. What I will point, another thing I'll point out, the frozen thing is interesting. That's actually a pretty good idea, and also blocks. I need to address blocks. For this thing.
Blocks would be good if you only generate auto papers once.
Right now, when you hit either of these buttons, it just spits out a report for every single group it can find without any question. So if I hit generate reports from tags, every single tag it finds in the drawing it spits out a report for. What we have at about 80% done is a little dialog that's going to pop up and say which tags you want to generate reports for, so you don't get all of them. So you could do something like you're asking for, where I'm only working on this chunk, maybe just split out reports for this section. So that would be a thing.
That would work.
But the frozen and blocks, I need to remember that. That's good. How am I doing for time? Yeah. Any other questions? or feature requests, especially feature requests, please? Right now, we only have one partner actually implementing auto papers. So we're kind of suffering from we don't know where to go with it in a way. We satisfy the problem for OFS brands, but we need more cases, more examples in order to know what kind of functionality we need to expand into. So if anyone's interested, by all means, let me know.
So again, from a practical perspective, if the designer customizes the paper space for any kind of notes and stuff, would you recommend those notes be on the remaining drawing instead of customized in the paper space? So that would be auto-generated, that note stays.
Yes, it should be in the drawing. Yes. Because it will be nuked every time they regenerate papers. So yeah, in the drawing. One last quick thing before I have to wrap up. So this has all been the abstract auto papers. This is all stuff that you can bake into your own extension. Something that we have at about 90% completion is what we're calling custom auto papers. Custom auto papers is going to be a user-facing side to auto papers, basically just a UI for it. It will give the end user the ability to make their own templates, as many as they like, and then run them themselves, select groups themselves, and yada yada. So entirely user-facing aside of auto papers. The idea being that a lot of dealerships have their own needs for their own in-house reporting. Custom auto papers will give them the ability to make their own reports and distribute them throughout the office and generate themselves. That will not be with 8.5, but it'll be in 8.5 at some point. So. Anything else? Questions, thoughts, opinions, objections? I'll take those. Is anyone else offended by these auto papers? You think they've wronged you somehow?
I think it's a very good productivity tool.
One question. How does it interact with schemes?
The schemes?
Yes, schemes would be applied to the report, but is there some kind of interaction when you say generate a set of reports for this scheme? Or a scheme is still your overriding? That's it's going to be applied to your.
I could. I'm not sure how the two would even interact, honestly. Because what's put into these papers are just viewports, just like any other viewports. If a scheme is applied, then you'll see the changes in the view in the reports.
It's a state of that
Yeah.
What if you set up occurring multiple times on the order, and you would want to have one installation page and then list all the tags on one page? So this group goes to these locations. That's a fairly common. So you have one installation page or one paper space. It can be duplicated if the installer wants to. Show them where it all goes.
Do you have a minute or two after the session? Can I ask you about that? I'm 100% confident we can do it. I mean, it's just I want some more details to know what you're looking for. If there are no questions, I think that's it. I'm going to be around for the rest of the day. If anyone wants to know any more about our papers, I'm glad to help. Thank you for your time.